The business card was matte black, embossed with a simple forest green logo. Inside the handcrafted wooden gift box was a signed contract. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 6 months of design work for Victoria Westbrook's expanding eco-fashion brand. I handed it to my father with genuine pride. It wasn't flashy or attention-seeking, just tangible proof that his youngest daughter's dreams weren't as foolish as the family believed. Dad opened the box slowly, examined the contract, then glanced at the business card before Natalie plucked it from his hands, waving it around like evidence at a trial. "Oh, look," she announced, loud enough for relatives to pause their conversations. "Olivia's still pretending her little hobby is a real business. Cute that she made herself business cards." She turned to me with that smile, the one that appears kind unless you've been on the receiving end of it for 29 years. "Maybe Dad can display it on the fridge next to my VP announcement." The room rippled with uncomfortable chuckles. Then someone, I think Uncle Phil, let out a genuine laugh, and others joined in. Not cruel laughter, but the dismissive kind, that carves deeper than outright mockery. I felt my face flush but kept my expression neutral. I reached forward, retrieved both the contract and card from Natalie's manicured fingers, returned them to the wooden box, and tucked it into my messenger bag. "Noted," I said simply. No explosion of anger, no tearful exit. Just quiet acknowledgement of what I'd always suspected, but never wanted to believe. 10 minutes later, I was edging toward the front door when I heard Mom call out, "Olivia, honey, don't leave yet. We haven't even cut the cake." Then Dad's voice, "Come on, kiddo. Natalie was just teasing. Don't be so sensitive." By the time I clicked the door shut behind me, several voices were calling after me. But for once, I wasn't turning back. My name is Olivia Chen, and from wherever you're watching this video, stay with me, because the afternoon they ridiculed my business dreams was the same day they realized I wasn't asking for their approval anymore. Growing up as the younger Chen daughter meant living in a very specific shadow. Natalie was our family's golden child, tall, striking, articulate, with academic achievements that couldn't fit on a single refrigerator door and the kind of confidence that commands attention in any room. I was shorter, quieter, the one who observed before speaking, who created rather than announced. The reliable one. When Natalie graduated from business school with honors, my parents hosted a garden party with catered food and custom cocktails. When I earned my design degree, Dad patted my shoulder and said, "Now for the real world, huh?" As if everything before had been pretend. I didn't expect identical treatment. Natalie and I were different people with different paths. But the pattern was unmistakable. Throughout my 20s, I became the family's creative utility player. I designed the invitations for Mom's charity fundraisers, for free. I created the logo for Dad's consulting business, unpaid. I spent 3 weeks building Natalie's personal brand website when she transitioned to her VP role at Meridian Marketing. She had promised to pay me but later called it Family Helping Family. I refined presentations for Dad's pitches, formatted Mom's nonprofit newsletters, and designed custom birthday cards for every relative. No one thought to ask if I had paying clients waiting. No one considered that every free family project pushed my actual business further down my priority list. They just assumed I'd handle it because that's what I'd always done, the quieter daughter who came through without complaint. Don't misunderstand. I didn't help to be noticed or thanked. I helped because creative work was my language of love. But somewhere along the way, my assistance transformed from appreciated to expected, and finally to invisible. 3 years ago, I left my secure position at a respected design agency to launch Green Canvas Design. My vision was clear: sustainable graphic design for environmentally conscious brands. No wasteful production processes, no throwaway marketing materials, just thoughtful design that honored both client needs and planetary boundaries. It wasn't revolutionary, but it was mine. My family's reaction was a masterclass in polite disbelief. "In this economy?" Dad had asked, eyebrows raised over his reading glasses. "Don't most of those eco-businesses fold within a year?" Natalie added, not looking up from her phone. Mom, always the diplomat, simply said, "We just want you to be secure, sweetie." Their skepticism stung, but it wasn't surprising. They had always viewed my creative pursuits as charming diversions rather than genuine career paths. So I stopped sharing business updates. I didn't mention when I landed my first major client, or when my sustainable packaging design won regional recognition. I didn't explain that my cute little hobby had evolved into a viable business that aligned with my values and, more slowly than I'd hoped but steadily, was growing. Instead, I listened to Natalie's elaborate success stories at family gatherings. I nodded appropriately when Mom asked if I was still doing that design thing, as if I might have abandoned it like a New Year's resolution by February. I absorbed Dad's well-meaning suggestions about applying for positions at real companies without correcting his assumption that mine wasn't one. I knew their perception of my business was skewed by my own silence, but trying to convince them felt exhausting. It was easier to let them believe what they wanted while I quietly built something meaningful. Then came Dad's 60th birthday celebration. I'd been working with Victoria Westbrook for almost 8 months on smaller projects. Her eco-friendly clothing brand had started locally, but was gaining national attention for its innovative materials and ethical manufacturing. When she approached me about a comprehensive rebranding to support their expansion, I knew it was exactly the kind of opportunity that could establish green canvas design as a serious contender in the sustainable design space. The contract was substantial, the largest of my career. 6 months of guaranteed work, an impressive retainer, and the possibility of ongoing collaboration. Victoria had even written a personal note explaining why she'd chosen my studio over larger agencies. "Your designs don't just communicate our message, they embody our values." I thought, naively perhaps, that this tangible evidence of my success might shift my family's perception. That seeing a legitimate contract might validate what I'd been building while they weren't looking. That Dad might finally understand why I'd left the security of agency work to create something of my own. I was wrong. The mockery wasn't malicious. That's what made it so insidious. They didn't hate my business or wish me failure. They simply couldn't imagine me succeeding. In their narrative, Natalie was the achiever, and I was the dreamer who needed gentle reality checks and corporate backup plans. They laughed because, to them, my professional ambition was endearing, but ultimately misguided, like a child insisting they'll become an astronaut. As I drove away from Dad's lakeside home, I wasn't heartbroken or furious. I was awake. Because when people show you who they see when they look at you, believe them. And when they chuckle at the version of you that's fighting to build something meaningful, you don't argue. You simply stop inviting them to witness the fight. At home that evening, I didn't cry. Not while changing into comfortable clothes. Not while making tea. Not even when my phone lit up with the first text from Mom. "Dad's a little hurt you left early. You know how special these family gatherings are to him." I read every message that followed. Mom's gentle guilt trips. Dad's brief, "Let's talk soon, kiddo." Cousin Zoe's more perceptive, "That was rough. You okay?" And finally, Natalie's non-apology. "Don't be so dramatic." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. It was just a little teasing between sisters. Every message confirmed what I'd realized at the party. They weren't seeing me. They were seeing the version of me that fit comfortably into their family dynamic, the creative but impractical younger daughter who needed guidance rather than recognition. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I opened my laptop and began methodically untangling my professional resources from my family obligations. First, I archived the folder of design assets I'd created for family use. letterheads, logos, social media templates, presentation decks. I wasn't erasing my past work, but I was removing it from my active projects. Next, I drafted a simple email to Natalie regarding her website. As I'm shifting focus to contracted clients, I'll be transitioning. Website maintenance back to you by the end of the month. I've created documentation for your reference. Attached was a detailed guide for a platform so intuitive that even the most technologically resistant could navigate it. I wasn't angry. I wasn't seeking revenge. I just recognized that I had been volunteering my professional skills to people who fundamentally misunderstood their value, and it was time to redirect that energy toward those who did. Over the next few days, the messages from my family evolved from confusion to concern to mild irritation. Dad called twice, leaving voicemails that danced around an apology without actually offering one. "We miss you, kiddo. Let's not make this a bigger deal than it needs to be." Mom's texts were more direct. "Olivia, are you updating the reunion invitations? The family is asking." And later, "Did something happen to Natalie's website? She says she can't access the admin dashboard." I responded to none of them, not because I was being petty, but because I was being intentional. For the first time, I was treating my business with the same seriousness they gave to Natalie's career, which meant not dropping paying work to handle family projects that could have been shared more equitably, or better yet, compensated fairly. What surprised me wasn't their reaction but my own. The guilt I expected to feel never materialized. Instead, I experienced a profound sense of professional clarity. My calendar, no longer cluttered with family design emergencies, allowed me to focus deeply on Victoria's rebranding project. My creative energy, no longer drained by unappreciated efforts, flowed more freely into work that was valued. I slept better. I stopped checking my phone compulsively. I attended a local entrepreneurs meetup and connected with other small business owners who understood the unique challenges of building something from scratch. I reclaimed not just my time, but my confidence. 2 weeks after Dad's birthday, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, a new boundary I was establishing, but something made me answer. "Olivia Chen of Green Canvas Design," I said, using my professional greeting for perhaps the first time with a personal call. "Olivia, it's Victoria Westbrook." Her voice carried the energetic warmth that had made her brand so magnetic. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." "Not at all," I replied, already reaching for my notebook. "What can I help with?" What followed wasn't a quick client check-in, but news that altered my professional trajectory. Victoria's brand had caught the attention of a major sustainable retailer looking to feature her collection. The timeline for expansion had accelerated dramatically, and with it, the scope of our design project had nearly doubled. "I know it's a significant increase from our original agreement," Victoria said, "but after seeing your initial concepts, I couldn't imagine working with anyone else on this. You understand our ethos in a way larger agencies simply don't." We discussed details, adjusted timelines, and by the end of the call, my modest design studio had secured a contract that would not only stabilize my business for the year, but potentially open doors to an entire network of sustainable brands. As I hung up, my phone buzzed with a family group chat notification. Dad was hosting an impromptu Sunday dinner. "Natalie has exciting news about a potential promotion," Mom had written. "Everyone be there by 5. In the past, I would have rearranged my schedule, set aside my work, and shown up with a bottle of wine and prepared congratulatory remarks. I would have listened to Natalie's detailed account of her professional triumph while my own remained unmentioned. I would have helped Mom in the kitchen, designed an impromptu digital card for Natalie, and left feeling slightly hollow despite the good food and familiar company. This time, I simply replied, "Congratulations to Natalie. I have client deadlines and won't be able to attend." 3 little dots appeared as Mom began typing, disappeared, then reappeared. Finally, We haven't seen you since the birthday. Dad's a little worried. I didn't respond. Not because I was being cruel, but because I was being consistent. Professional boundaries aren't cruel, they're necessary. And for too long, I had allowed mine to be so porous that my family didn't even recognize them as boundaries at all. That Sunday evening, as my family gathered without me, I met Marcus for coffee at Timber and Bean. Marcus had been my colleague at the design agency before launching his own UX consultancy. Unlike my family, he had never questioned the viability of my business because he understood the industry and, more importantly, my capabilities within it. "So they actually laughed?" he asked, after I recounted the birthday incident. "Not maliciously," I clarified. "More like indulgently, as if I'd announced I was training for the Olympics at age 30. Marcus shook his head. "They have no idea what you've built, do they?" "They never asked," I said simply. We spent the next hour discussing the expanded Westbrook project, strategizing approaches, considering collaborators. It wasn't just shop talk. It was recognition. Acknowledgement of the business I had built despite the doubts, the work I had, earned through persistence and talent. Later that night, my phone rang again. Dad this time. I hesitated before answering. "Olivia?" His voice carried the slight gruffness that often masked his more vulnerable emotions. "You missed dinner." "I had work commitments," I replied, keeping my tone light but firm. "Your sister's being considered for regional director." "That's wonderful. Please congratulate her for me." A pause stretched between us, filled with all the things he wasn't asking and I wasn't volunteering. "Your mother says you haven't been responding to her messages about the family projects." Here it was, the real reason for his call. Not concern about my absence, but the gap it had created in the family's operations. "I'm focusing on contracted work right now," I explained. "My business is at a critical growth phase." "Olivia." His sigh carried decades of well-intentioned misunderstanding. "We support your creativity, but family comes first. Always has. In this house." "I agree that family is important," I said carefully. "But professional respect should be part of that." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means that when you and Mom need Natalie's marketing expertise, you consult her as a professional. When you need my design skills, you treat it as a hobby I should donate." His silence told me this perspective had never occurred to him. "No one ever said your work wasn't valuable," he finally offered. "You laughed at my contract, Dad." Another pause. "Your sister was just teasing." And everyone joined in, including you. I wasn't accusatory or emotional, just matter of fact. Perhaps that's why he had no ready response. "I have an early client meeting tomorrow," I said, softening slightly. "We can talk another time." After we hung up, I sat with the conversation, turning it over like a smooth stone in my palm. There was no satisfaction in his discomfort, no vindication in pointing out the double standard. Just a quiet certainty that I was finally honoring my work by expecting others to do the same. The weeks that followed brought a curious shift in family dynamics. The casual requests for design help dwindled as my consistent boundaries took hold. Mom's guilt-tinged messages gave way to briefer, more respectful communication. Even Natalie seemed unsure how to engage with this version of her younger sister, the one who no longer orbited her achievements or provided behind-the-scenes support. Cousin Zoe invited me to lunch, curious about the change. "Uncle Robert actually asked if anyone knew a good designer for his new brochures," she reported with barely concealed amusement. "I thought Mom would choke on her coffee." "Did someone suggest me?" I asked. Aunt Elizabeth started to, then stopped herself. It was weird, like she suddenly realized something. What my mother had realized, I suspected, was that my professional skills weren't automatically available anymore. That my business wasn't a cute diversion, but my livelihood. That perhaps they had been taking for granted not just my help, but my entire professional identity. The Victoria Westbrook project consumed most of my summer. I expanded my team, bringing on 2 junior designers and a project manager. We transformed my modest studio space into a proper office. Green canvas design was no longer just me with a laptop and a dream. It was becoming the business I had envisioned 3 years earlier. I didn't share these developments with my family, not because I was hiding my success, but because I had stopped seeking their validation. I posted occasional updates on professional platforms, and if they had been interested in my business journey, they could have found evidence of its growth. But our conversations, when they happened, remained surface level, careful weather reports from distant countries. Then came the industry awards in September. The Westbrook rebranding campaign had been nominated for Excellence in Sustainable Design. It wasn't the most prestigious category, but for a small studio like mine, the recognition was significant. Marcus insisted on being my +1, arguing that someone should witness this milestone who genuinely understood its meaning. The ceremony was held at the Portland Art Museum, an elegant evening of creative celebration. When they announced Green Canvas design as the winner, the surrealism of the moment nearly overwhelmed me. I had prepared nothing, assuming larger agencies would dominate. But somehow, there I was, accepting a small crystal sculpture that represented everything I had built while no one was watching. My brief acceptance speech thanked Victoria for her trust, my team for their talent, and the sustainable design community for creating space for studios like mine. What I didn't say, what I had finally internalized, was that external validation, while sweet, wasn't why I had persisted. I had built Green Canvas design because it reflected my values, utilized my skills, and allowed me to contribute meaningfully to causes I believed in. The award was wonderful, but it wasn't why the work mattered. As Marcus and I celebrated over late-night ramen, my phone buzzed with notifications. The industry publication had posted winners online, including a brief interview I'd given earlier about the philosophy behind the Westbrook campaign. Colleagues were sharing congratulations, and buried among them, a message from Natalie. Just saw the design award announcement. Is this for real? I showed Marcus, who nearly choked on his noodles. Is this for real? He repeated incredulously. As if you'd fabricate an industry award? She's surprised, I said, more amused than offended. They all thought I was playing business. Are you going to respond? I considered the question. Not tonight, I decided. Tonight is for celebrating. The following morning brought more messages from family, Mom's cautious, "Congratulations on your award, honey. Is this for your work with that clothing designer?" Dad's brief, "Proud of you, kiddo." Even Uncle Phil, who had laughed the loudest, at Dad's birthday, sent an awkward, "Way to go." Their reactions weren't surprising. People often reassess your capabilities when external validation forces them to see you differently. But their belated recognition didn't fill me with the satisfaction I might have expected months earlier. Instead, I felt a gentle indifference, appreciation for their good wishes but no desperate need for their approval. I responded with brief thanks and returned to my work. The post-award momentum had brought new inquiries from potential clients, and I was focused on leveraging this visibility to strengthen my studio's position in the sustainable design space. That weekend, as I was reviewing applications for another junior designer position, my doorbell rang. I opened my apartment door to find Dad standing there, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Got a minute?" he asked, holding up a bottle of my favorite wine. I invited him in, curious about this unexpected visit. He examined my apartment with interest, particularly the small home office area where design samples and project timelines covered the walls. "Quite an operation you've got," he commented, nodding toward my workspace. "It's mostly at the studio now," I explained, pouring the wine. "This is just my home overflow." He settled onto my sofa, looking uncharacteristically hesitant. "Your award is a big deal, huh?" "It's nice recognition," I acknowledged, "especially for a studio our size." Our size? He raised an eyebrow. You've expanded? And there it was. The confirmation that he had no idea what my business had become because he had never genuinely asked. For a moment, I considered deflecting, keeping the details of my professional life as private as they had been for months. But there was no hostility in his question, just belated curiosity. So I told him about Victoria's expanded contract, about the additional designers I'd hired, about the studio space downtown with the living plant wall and reclaimed wood conference table, about the 3 new sustainable brands that had approached us following the award announcement. He listened without interrupting, his expression shifting from surprise to something that looked remarkably like respect. "Why didn't you tell us any of this?" he finally asked. I considered my answer carefully. Because I got tired of having to prove my business was real. He winced slightly. That birthday thing. That, and 3 years of subtle dismissals before it. Dad sighed, running a hand through his silver hair. "We never meant to dismiss what you were building. We just worried. Small businesses are risky." "So is staying somewhere that doesn't value your vision," I countered gently. He nodded slowly, absorbing the point. "Fair enough." He took a sip of wine before continuing. "Your mother wants to host a dinner to celebrate your award. Just family. The invitation hung between us, an olive branch perhaps, but also a test of whether our relationship could find new footing." "I'd like that," I said, surprising myself with the sincerity of it. "But I'd need to check my calendar." Dad's eyebrows rose slightly at this qualification. This evidence that family obligations no longer automatically trumped professional commitments. But he nodded. "Of course. Let us know what works." As he prepared to leave, he paused at my design. Wall, studying a mood board for an upcoming project. "You know, I never quite understood what sustainable design meant," he admitted. "I thought it was just using recycled paper or something." "It's a whole approach," I explained. "Considering environmental impact at every stage, materials, production, methods, life cycle. Designing for longevity rather than disposability." He nodded thoughtfully. "Like building something meant to last." "Exactly," I agreed, recognizing the metaphor that extended beyond design principles. The celebration dinner happened 2 weeks later. I arrived prepared for performative praise or awkward attempts to reestablish old patterns. Instead, I found something unexpected. Genuine interest. Mom had researched the award, printing out articles that mentioned green canvas design. Natalie, while still Natalie, asked specific questions about my business model rather than offering unsolicited advice. Even Uncle Phil wanted to understand how sustainable design differed from regular design. The shift wasn't dramatic. Family dynamics rarely transform overnight, but it was noticeable. They were seeing me differently because I had finally refused to be seen on their terms. After dessert, as conversations broke into smaller groups, Natalie approached me on the patio. "So," she began with her characteristic directness, "you're actually doing this? For real?" "I've been doing it for real for 3 years," I pointed out mildly. She had the grace to look slightly abashed. "Fair point." She studied her wineglass before continuing. "That day at Dad's birthday, I was out of line." Coming from Natalie, this acknowledgement was significant. She rarely admitted missteps. "You were," I agreed simply. "It's just—" She hesitated, which was even more unusual for her. "You never seem to care about recognition or competition. You just did your thing quietly." "I still do," I said, "but quietly doesn't mean apologetically." She considered this, nodding slowly. "I might need your help with something, actually. Professionally. Paid," she added quickly. "My team is launching a sustainability initiative, and we need someone who understands the space authentically." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. My supposedly impractical business focus had become an in-demand expertise, even within her corporate world. "Send me the details," I said. "I'll see if it's a good fit for us." Us, not me. A studio, not a hobby. The distinction wasn't petty. It was fundamental. As I drove home that night, I reflected on the journey from Dad's birthday to this cautiously recalibrated family dynamic. I hadn't set out to prove anything when I walked away that day. I had simply recognized that continuing to accept their perception of my work meant continuing to undervalue it myself. The real transformation wasn't in their newfound respect, welcome, though it was, but in my unwavering belief in what I was building. I no longer needed them to validate green canvas design because I had done that myself, day after day, client after client. The following week, I hosted a small gathering at my apartment. Not family this time, but the circle of friends and colleagues who had supported my vision without requiring external proof of its value. Marcus brought absurdly expensive cheese. Sophia and Elijah, fellow entrepreneurs I'd met at a sustainability conference, brought natural wine and stories of their own business growing pains. Aiden, my new project manager, made everyone laugh with his impression of our most demanding client. As conversations flowed around my living room, I stepped onto the balcony for a moment of quiet reflection. Portland spread below me, lights glimmering against the autumn darkness. Somewhere in that tapestry of light and shadow was my studio, the physical manifestation of a dream I had refused to diminish to meet others' expectations. My phone buzzed with a text from Dad. "Your mother wants to know if you'll help with the holiday cards this year." "Paid, of course," he added, clearly remembering our conversation. "She says no one does them quite like you." I smiled at this small acknowledgement of my professional value, this tentative new respect. Family relationships are complex recalibrations, rarely perfect, always evolving. I wasn't interested in holding grudges or demanding apologies. I was interested in moving forward with clarity on both sides. "I can recommend some excellent designers," I texted back. "Or if you'd like green canvas specifically, I'll send our current rates and availability." His response came quickly. "Send the rates. You're worth it." 3 simple words that contained volumes, not just personal affirmation from a father to a daughter, but professional recognition from one business owner to another. The distinction mattered, not because I loved him less as a daughter, but because I had finally claimed the professional respect that had always been extended to my sister without question. Looking back at that moment at Dad's birthday, when laughter rippled through the room at my expense, I can now see it as the catalyst it was. Not a wound, but a wake-up call. The moment I stopped auditioning for approval and started expecting the recognition I had earned. The truth about building something meaningful, whether it's a business, a relationship, or a sense of self-worth, is that you can't expect others to value what you yourself are willing to discount. My family didn't take my business seriously because, in small ways, I had signaled that they didn't need to. Each time I set aside paid work for free family projects, each time I downplayed my professional accomplishments to avoid seeming competitive. With Natalie, each time I absorbed their well-meaning skepticism without correction, I had participated in my own diminishment. The day I walked out of Dad's birthday celebration, I wasn't just rejecting their perception of me, I was reclaiming my own. Now, as my business continues to grow, as our client list expands and our work gains recognition, I know that the most important validation was never going to come from family applause or industry awards. It was always going to come from the quiet certainty that I had built something authentic, something that reflected my values, utilized my talents, and contributed meaningfully to causes I believed in. My sister mocked my failing business at Dad's birthday. Then my client called, and eventually, everyone went silent. Not because they were shocked by my success, though that was part of it, but because they finally recognized what I had known all along. I wasn't asking for their permission to succeed. I was simply getting on with it, whether they were watching or not. The greatest freedom I've found isn't in proving them wrong. It's in no longer needing to prove anything at all. Over the next 3 weeks, silence from my family felt like a vacuum steadily filling with question marks. No calls from Mom about design emergencies. No texts from Natalie asking me to just quickly look over her presentations. No casual assumptions that I'd drop everything to help with Dad's business projects. It wasn't that I'd cut them off entirely. I just stopped volunteering my professional skills at the expense of my own business. I stopped treating my expertise as a family resource while they treated Natalie's corporate achievements as worthy of celebration dinners and group toasts. What surprised me most wasn't their reaction, but my own. The guilt I'd expected, the nagging worry that I was being selfish or ungenerous, never materialized. Instead, I felt lighter, more focused. My days, no longer interrupted by family design, emergencies, developed a rhythm that served my actual goals rather than everyone else's. At night, instead of staying up until 2 a.m. finishing Dad's brochure, because family comes first, I sketched concepts for Victoria's rebranding, sent thoughtful responses to potential client inquiries, and occasionally, revolutionary concept, just relaxed. I read books again. I took evening walks along the waterfront. I slept deeply, without my phone lighting up with Natalie's midnight urgent requests. The first real test came when my cousin Zoe texted, "Hey, thinking of updating my yoga studio's logo. Would love your professional input if you have availability." I read the message 3 times, surprised by her careful wording. No assumption of free work, no family obligation lever, just a straightforward business inquiry. "Thanks for thinking of me," I replied. "I'd be happy to discuss this professionally. I can send over my consultation rates and process if you're interested." Her response came quickly. "Absolutely. Send the details and we'll go from there. I know what good design costs. I've been following your work." That last sentence landed like a revelation. Someone in my family had been paying attention to my business all along, not as a cute hobby, but as a legitimate enterprise. It wasn't that Zoe had some special insight. She'd simply taken the time to look. I sent her my standard client information packet, and we scheduled a proper consultation. When we met at her studio the following week, she treated me exactly how she would treat any professional she'd hired, with prepared questions, clear objectives, and respect for my expertise. No family dinner gossip. No, "Remember when you were 5 and colored all over my homework," reminiscing. Just 2 business owners discussing a creative partnership. As I drove home from that meeting, I realized I'd been enforcing my boundaries all wrong before. I hadn't needed dramatic declarations or angry confrontations. I just needed to consistently treat my own work with the seriousness I wanted others to give it. Zoe had understood that intuitively. The rest of my family was still catching up. 15 days after Dad's birthday, the first crack in the family silence appeared. Mom called on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the middle of a client meeting, so I let it go to voicemail, finishing my presentation before listening to her message. "Olivia, honey," she began, her voice carrying that careful neutrality she used when trying to navigate choppy emotional waters. "I'm reaching out about the Chen family reunion invitations. I know you usually design them, but if you're too busy with your business projects, I can find someone else. Just let me know. Love you." The small pause before business projects spoke volumes, a subtle indication that she still didn't quite view green canvas design as a legitimate enterprise, but was trying to be diplomatic. Progress, albeit microscopic. I waited until evening to call her back, when I could give the conversation my full attention rather than squeezing it between client work. "Mom, thanks for your message," I said when she answered. "I appreciate you checking about the reunion invitations." "Of course, honey. We know you're busy these days." Her tone was light, but I detected the unspoken question beneath it. Too busy even for family? I am, I confirmed, not apologizing for it. Green Canvas has taken on several new clients, and I've had to be very intentional about my project calendar. Well, family comes first, she replied automatically, the Chen family mantra that had always meant drop everything when we need you. Actually, Mom, right now my business needs to come first. I kept my voice gentle but firm. I've worked hard to build it, and it requires my full attention at this growth stage. I'm happy to recommend some other designers for the invitations, or if you'd like to hire me professionally, I can send over my current rates and availability. The silence that followed contained multitudes: surprise, confusion, perhaps a touch of hurt. We'd never had this conversation before. The explicit acknowledgement that my professional time had monetary value, even within the family. Hire you? She finally said. You're my daughter. We don't hire family. You don't ask Natalie to manage your social media campaigns for free, I pointed out, or create marketing strategies for Dad's business without compensation. That's different, she began, then stopped herself. Isn't it? Why would it be? I asked simply. Another pause, longer this time. I could almost hear her reorganizing some foundational assumptions about our family dynamics. I suppose we've never thought about your design work the same way. We think about Natalie's corporate position, she admitted. It always seemed more flexible. Because I made it flexible, I acknowledged. I've always prioritized family requests over my own clients, but I can't do that anymore if I want my business to thrive. Mom absorbed this, her silence thoughtful rather than defensive. Finally, she said, "What are your rates for invitation design?" It wasn't a full recognition of the years of undervaluing my work, but it was a step. A small acknowledgement that perhaps the family had been operating on outdated assumptions about my professional identity. I quoted my standard rate, half expecting her to balk. Instead, she simply said, "Email me the details, and I'll discuss it with your father." After we hung up, I sat with the strange new feeling of having advocated for my work within my family circle. It wasn't triumphant or vindictive, just a quiet rightness, like a picture finally hanging level after years of being slightly askew. The next morning, I sent Mom my standard project agreement. By afternoon, she had signed it and returned it with a note. Looking forward to seeing what you create. We've always loved your designs. That last line caught me off guard. They had appreciated my work all along. They just hadn't recognized it as work. The distinction mattered more than I'd realized. Working on the reunion invitations as a paid project rather than a family obligation shifted something subtle but significant in my approach. I treated it with the same professionalism I gave to any client project. A proper creative brief, scheduled work sessions, formal presentation of concepts. The result was still infused with personal knowledge of my family, but it carried the polish of work created with focused intention rather than squeezed between real projects. When I presented the final designs to Mom over a video call, her reaction surprised me. "These are different," she said, studying them carefully. "More sophisticated than what you've done for us before." "Different process, different result," I explained. "When I can give a project my full professional attention, this is the standard I deliver." She nodded slowly, her expression shifting from surprise to something I rarely saw directed at my work: admiration. "They're beautiful, Olivia. Thanks all. You." A pause then. "I'm sorry if we haven't always appreciated what you do." Mom, it wasn't a comprehensive acknowledgement of years of undervaluing my skills, but it was a start, an opening in a conversation we'd never properly had. "Thank you," I said simply, accepting both the compliment and the apology without needing to dissect either. After finalizing the invitations, I expected our interaction to revert to its usual pattern: Mom returning to her comfortable perception of me as the helpful daughter, me slipping back into the role of family creative resource. Instead, something had fundamentally shifted. The professional boundary I'd established remained intact, creating space for a different kind of relationship to emerge. Mom began sending occasional articles about sustainable design that she found in her browsing. Dad texted to ask how the business was going, a small but meaningful acknowledgement that green canvas design was an actual enterprise, not just a placeholder until I found a real job. Even Natalie's communication style shifted slightly. Less assumption, more direct requests. None of them fully understood what I was building. They still viewed small business ownership through the lens of risk rather than opportunity. Still, occasionally made comments that revealed they saw my career as somehow less substantial than Natalie's corporate path. But they were trying, in their way, to recalibrate their perception of my professional identity. Then came the morning everything changed. I was in my small studio space downtown, reviewing portfolio samples from a potential junior designer, when my phone lit up with Victoria's name. Our weekly check-in wasn't scheduled until tomorrow, so I answered with slight concern. "Victoria, everything okay with the color palette revisions?" "Better than okay," she replied, her voice carrying the energetic warmth that made her such a compelling brand founder. "I'm calling with news, and I wanted you to hear it directly from me." My mind immediately ran through possibilities: budget cuts, project delays, scope changes, the usual client curveballs. Westbrook was just featured in Sustainable Style's Brands to Watch issue, she continued. The article specifically mentions our rebranding, calling it a masterclass in communicating environmental values through sophisticated design language. They named green canvas design explicitly. I sat down abruptly, the significance washing over me. Sustainable Style wasn't just any industry publication, it was the Bible of eco-conscious fashion, with a readership that included exactly the client base I had been working to attract. "That's incredible," I managed, professional composure momentarily abandoned. "It gets better," Victoria said, her smile audible. "They've reached out for a feature on the collaborative process between sustainable brands and design studios. They want to interview both of us next week." By the time our call ended, my hands were shaking slightly, not from nervousness but from the sudden expansion of possibilities. This kind of industry recognition could transform Green Canvas from a promising small studio to a recognized name in sustainable design. The clients it could attract, the projects it could make possible, the growth it could support, the trajectory of my business had just shifted dramatically upward. I wanted to share the news, to have someone understand its significance. Without thinking, I texted Marcus. "Sustainable Style feature." They named the studio specifically. "Interview next week." His response came immediately. "Holy shit, this calls for celebration. Dinner tonight, non-negotiable." Then, on impulse, I texted Zoe as well. Of all my family members, she was the one who had shown genuine interest in understanding my business. "Remember that clothing brand I've been working with? We just got featured in Sustainable Style. They're interviewing us next week." Her reply made me smile. "That's major. Isn't that the one with the impossibly glossy pages that everyone in the conscious fashion world obsesses over?" "Olivia, this is huge." Someone got it. Someone in my family actually understood the significance of this moment. I hesitated, then took a screenshot of Victoria's email with the article link and sent it to my parents' group chat. No explanation, no exclamation points. Just evidence of something substantial taking shape. Dad responded first. "Looks impressive, kiddo. Is this a big deal in your industry?" The question itself represented progress, the acknowledgement that I existed within an industry with its own markers of success and recognition. "Yes," I replied simply. "It's a significant publication for sustainable design and ethical fashion. Being featured opens doors to exactly the kind of clients Green Canvas is positioned to serve. Mom's response came next. Congratulations, honey. We're so proud of you. Standard mom fare, but welcome nonetheless. Then, more surprisingly, Natalie. Nice work. Oh, pretty major press for a small studio. Coming from my sister, who measured success in corporate promotions and salary increases, this recognition, however qualified with "for a small studio," felt meaningful. I put my phone away and returned to the portfolio review, but something had shifted in my chest. A tightness I hadn't fully acknowledged loosening just slightly. Their approval didn't validate my work. The feature and upcoming interview did that. But their recognition that something significant was happening in my professional life, something worthy of acknowledgement, mattered in a different way. That evening, Marcus insisted on taking me to Timber and Bean, the cozy place that had become our unofficial celebration spot since our agency days. As we clinked glasses of local Pinot Noir, he studied me with the perceptive gaze of someone who'd watched my journey from employee to business owner. "You know what's different?" he said finally. "You're not apologizing anymore." "For what?" "For taking your work seriously." He took a sip of wine. "When you first started Green Canvas, you always had this slight hesitation when discussing it, like you were expecting people to question your choices. That's gone now." I considered this observation, recognizing its truth. I guess I stopped waiting for permission to see my business as legitimate. "Exactly," he nodded. "And coincidentally, that's when other people started seeing it that way too." The insight lingered as we discussed the upcoming interview, the potential new clients, the possibility of hiring another designer. Marcus had always believed in Green Canvas, even when my own family viewed it as a risky diversion from a proper career path. His support hadn't been about blind encouragement. He understood the industry enough to recognize a viable business model when he saw one. What had changed wasn't his perception, but my willingness to own my vision without qualification. The sustainable style interview the following week went better than I could have hoped. The journalist asked thoughtful questions about the collaborative process, the challenges of communicating environmental values visually, and the growing importance of authentic sustainability messaging in consumer brands. Victoria and I shared perspectives that complemented each other, her passion for ethical manufacturing practices, and my commitment to design that reflected those values without resorting to predictable, green cliches. When the interviewer asked about my background, I spoke confidently about my agency experience and the vision that had led me to establish Green Canvas Design. No hedging, no minimizing, no subtle suggestions that it was all a work in progress, just clear articulation of a business founded on specific principles and expertise. "What advice would you give to designers considering specializing in the sustainability space?" she asked near the end of our conversation. I thought carefully before answering. Understand that it's not just an aesthetic choice. It's a comprehensive approach that affects every decision from materials to production methods to client selection. And recognize that expertise in this area has genuine market value. Don't undercharge or apologize for specializing in work that aligns with critical environmental values. As I spoke those words, I realized I was articulating a lesson I'd only recently internalized myself. That expertise aligned with values didn't diminish its professional worth, but enhanced it. After the interview, Victoria suggested lunch to celebrate our collaboration. Over plates of locally sourced food at her favorite downtown restaurant, she shared news that shifted my business trajectory once again. "I've been talking with some other founders in the sustainable products space," she said, breaking off a piece of artisanal bread. "Several of us are scaling simultaneously, and we've been discussing the challenges of maintaining cohesive brand messaging across that growth." I nodded, familiar with the common pain points for expanding conscious brands. "Your work with Westbrook has become something of a case study among us," she continued. "The way you've managed to enhance our brand, sophistication while preserving its ethical foundations. It's exactly what many of these companies are struggling to achieve. My attention sharpened. That's precisely the challenge Green Canvas is positioned to address. Exactly, Victoria smiled. Which is why I've suggested a sustainable brand collective, a group of aligned companies sharing resources and recommendations. And I've put Green Canvas Design at the top of our preferred partners list for visual communication. The implication was clear and enormous. This wasn't just about one successful client relationship, but potential access to an entire network of values-aligned brands at growth stages where professional design services were essential. That's significant, I managed, professional understatement barely containing my excitement. It's mutually beneficial, Victoria noted pragmatically. These companies need design partners who understand their unique market position. Your studio has demonstrated that understanding repeatedly. As we discussed the possibilities, a text notification appeared on my phone, Mom asking if I was free for dinner that weekend. Dad wants to hear more about your magazine feature. Natalie will be there too. A familiar request, but something about its timing felt significant as I sat discussing a potential business development that could transform Green Canvas Design. The contrast between where I was and where my family still saw me, between the professional reality I was building and their gradually evolving perception of it, had never been clearer. I texted back, "Let me check my calendar and get back to you," then returned my attention to the conversation that was actively shaping my business future. That evening, as I updated my project management system to accommodate potential new clients, from Victoria's network, I considered my family's dinner invitation with new clarity. 3 months ago, I would have immediately rearranged my schedule to accommodate it. 2 months ago, I might have declined out of lingering frustration over their dismissal of my work. Now, I could approach it simply as one commitment among many, to be evaluated based on my actual availability and priorities. I checked my calendar, noted a brunch meeting with a potential new client on Sunday morning, and texted Mom, "Saturday evening works. What time?" Her response came quickly, 7 p.m., looking forward to it. No guilt trip about checking my calendar. First, no assumption that I would drop everything for family dinner. Just confirmation of details between adults with respective commitments. Another small shift, but a meaningful one. Saturday evening arrived mild and clear, a perfect early summer Portland evening. I drove to my parents' Lake Oswego home with windows down, enjoying the scent of neighborhood gardens and the sense of arriving as my authentic self, not the family's creative utility player, not the quiet younger sister living in Natalie's shadow, but Olivia Chen, founder of a design studio gaining recognition in its specialty area. Dad opened the door. "Welcome," warm in his smile. "There she is," he said, enveloping me in a brief hug, "the magazine feature girl." I laughed at his characterization but appreciated the acknowledgement. "That's me. How are you, Dad?" "Good, good. Your mother's finishing up dinner, and Natalie just called, running about 15 minutes late." Some things never changed. In the kitchen, Mom was arranging a charcuterie board with the focused attention she brought to any hosting duty. She looked up with a smile as I entered. "Olivia, perfect timing. Can you take this to the patio? It's too nice to eat inside tonight." I carried the board outside, noting the carefully set table with candles already lit against the coming dusk. Mom had always expressed care through these details. The proper glasses for each beverage, the cloth napkins ironed to crisp perfection, the flowers arranged just so. Tonight, there was a small additional touch that caught my attention. A folded copy of Sustainable Style placed at what I knew would be my seat. She'd bought the magazine, actually sought out a publication completely outside her usual reading, to see my studio mentioned. The gesture, small but deliberate, touched me unexpectedly. When Natalie arrived 20 minutes later, she breezed onto the patio with her characteristic energy. "Sorry I'm late. Client emergency." She bent to kiss Mom's cheek, then turned to me with a smile that seemed only slightly performative. "The magazine star. Let me see this famous feature." Her tone walked the line between genuine interest and the slight competitiveness that had always characterized our relationship. I passed her the magazine, open to the relevant page, watching, as she scanned the article with professional assessment. "Impressive," she said finally, and I was surprised to detect no undercurrent of reservation in her voice. Getting name recognition in a publication like this is solid brand positioning. Their readership is super loyal, too. It was the kind of evaluation she would offer a colleague, professional recognition of a strategic win. Not emotional support. Exactly, but something that, in some ways, meant more from Natalie. Acknowledgement of business acumen. "Thanks," I said, accepting both the magazine and the compliment with equal simplicity. As we settled into dinner, the conversation flowed, more easily than I'd anticipated. Dad asked thoughtful questions about sustainable design principles. Mom shared that she'd mentioned my feature to her book club, and several members had expressed interest in environmentally conscious branding for their own businesses. Even Natalie, between anecdotes about her corporate triumphs, asked about my studio's growth plans with what seemed like genuine curiosity. "Are you thinking of hiring more designers?" she asked as Mom served dessert. "Scaling can be tricky for creative businesses." "I'm in the interview process for a junior designer now," I confirmed, "and considering a project manager if the current client pipeline develops as expected." Natalie nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Smart to start with project management. Creatives often underestimate the operational infrastructure needed for growth." It was the kind of shop talk we'd never really engaged in before. Professional to professional rather than successful sister to hobby-having sibling. The shift was subtle, but significant. As the evening wound down and stars appeared above the lake, Dad refilled wine glasses and proposed a toast. "To Olivia and Green Canvas Design. We're proud of what you're building." Simple words, but ones I'd never heard directed at my business before. Not, "We're proud you're pursuing your passion," or, "We're proud you're being creative," but specific, recognition of the enterprise I was constructing through deliberate effort and vision. I raised my glass, meeting each of their gazes in turn. "Thank you." Mom reached over to squeeze my hand briefly. "We should have paid more attention sooner," she said quietly. "I'm sorry about that." The acknowledgement, unexpected and unasked for, loosened something in my chest. Not because I needed their validation anymore, but because it represented growth on both sides. My confidence in asserting my professional identity and their willingness to recalibrate their perception of it. "I should have been clearer about my boundaries," I acknowledged. "It's easy to fall into familiar patterns." Natalie, never one for extended emotional moments, redirected the conversation with characteristic efficiency. "Speaking of boundaries, Olivia, Meridian is looking to partner with a design studio that specializes in sustainable messaging for our new environmental initiative. Would that create awkward family dynamics, or should I connect you with our project lead?" The question itself represented a seismic shift in our relationship. Natalie viewing my business as a potential professional resource rather than a cute side project. More significantly, she was asking rather than assuming my availability or interest. "I'd be happy to have that conversation," I said, appreciating both the opportunity and the way it was presented. "Send me the details and we can explore whether it's a good fit for Green Canvas." As I drove home later that night, the evening's subtle recalibrations settled around me like a gentle adjustment to gravity. Not a dramatic transformation, but a shift in fundamental forces. My family hadn't suddenly developed perfect understanding of my business or my boundaries. Natalie hadn't abandoned her competitive edge. Mom still occasionally slipped into viewing my work through a maternal rather than professional lens. Dad still worried about the instability of entrepreneurship compared to corporate employment. But they were trying, in their ways, to see me more clearly. to recognize that the path I'd chosen wasn't a placeholder or a phase, but a deliberate direction with its own measures of success. And I was trying too, to accept their evolving understanding without resentment for how long it had taken, to establish boundaries without building walls, to share my professional journey without requiring them to validate each step. The next morning, as sunlight streamed through my apartment windows, I opened my laptop to an email from Victoria. The subject line read simply, "First referral from the collective." A sustainable home goods company was expanding its product line and needed comprehensive brand extension work. They had seen our Westbrook redesign, heard Victoria's recommendation, and wanted to discuss working with Green Canvas Design. I began drafting a response, feeling the full weight of the opportunity. This wasn't just another client inquiry. It was evidence that the foundation I'd been carefully building was strong enough to support real growth. That the business I'd defended at Dad's birthday was becoming exactly what I'd envisioned when I left agency life 3 years earlier. Mid-draft, my phone buzzed with a text from Natalie. "Connected you with our sustainability project lead. She's excited to talk. This is strictly professional. No sister discount expected." I smiled at that last part. Natalie's acknowledgement, in her characteristic direct way, that our personal and professional relationships could exist in parallel without inappropriate overlap. "Appreciated," I texted back, looking forward to the conversation. Then I returned to my response to the home goods company, to the business I'd built while no one was watching, to the vision I'd defended when they laughed, to the future that was unfolding not because my family finally saw its value, but because I had never stopped seeing it myself. The path forward wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about continuing to prove myself right. One client, one project, one boundary at a time. And the view from here, from this place of quiet confidence in my professional identity, was worth every uncomfortable conversation, every enforced boundary, every moment of standing my ground. Because when you finally stop trying to make others understand your value, you create the space to simply embody it. And eventually, the people who matter will either adjust their vision or reveal that they were never really seeing you at all. For me and Green Canvas Design, the picture was finally coming into focus. Not perfect, still developing, but increasingly, unmistakably clear. The Sustainable Style interview hit newsstands on a Tuesday morning, and by noon, my inbox was overflowing. With notifications, industry colleagues sending congratulations, potential clients requesting consultations. Even my former boss at the design agency forwarding the digital version with a simple message. "Well deserved, you've found your lane." That last note struck me particularly. Finding my lane. It was an apt description for what had happened since walking out of Dad's birthday celebration. I hadn't changed direction entirely. I'd always been moving toward building Green Canvas Design. But I'd finally stopped straddling multiple tracks, trying to be both the reliable family fixer and a serious business owner. I'd chosen my lane, and committed to it fully. The day after the magazine release, Victoria called with news that accelerated that momentum even further. A sustainable investment group had approached Westbrook about featuring our rebranding collaboration at their annual conference, a gathering that brought together eco-conscious brands, venture capitalists, and industry leaders in the sustainability space. "They want us to present together," Victoria explained, her usual measured tone tinged with excitement, "a case study in how thoughtful design can amplify environmental messaging without sacrificing market appeal." The opportunity was significant. On multiple levels: exposure to potential clients, positioning Green Canvas as an authority in sustainable design, and demonstrating our collaborative approach with brand partners. I agreed immediately, already mentally mapping the presentation structure as we discussed logistics. "One more thing," Victoria added before ending the call. "The conference organizers mentioned they're looking for design partners for next year's event materials. I may have mentioned you specialize in sustainable print and digital approaches." By the time we hung up, I'd added 2 major opportunities to my business development pipeline, all stemming from work I might never have completed had I continued prioritizing unpaid family projects over paying clients. The contrast between where Green Canvas stood now and where it had been just 2 months earlier was stark evidence of what focused attention could accomplish. That evening, as I worked late updating project timelines to accommodate these new opportunities, my phone lit up with a text from Dad. Saw someone reading your magazine at the coffee shop today. Told them my daughter was the designer they were reading about. Hope that's okay. The message caught me off guard, not just its content, but the subtle pride it conveyed. Dad had never publicly identified with my design career before, had never introduced me to his friends or colleagues as my daughter, the designer, with any particular emphasis. His professional pride had always been reserved for Natalie's corporate achievements, which aligned more closely with his own business, background and values. More than okay, I texted back. Thanks, Dad. Any chance you're free for lunch tomorrow? He replied. Would like to hear more about these new opportunities Victoria mentioned. Mom said you're presenting at some conference? Another surprise. Not only had he been listening when Mom relayed information about my business, but he was actively seeking more details. I checked my calendar, saw that my afternoon was relatively clear, and confirmed a meeting place. The restaurant Dad suggested was close to his office, a place he often took business associates rather than family. When I arrived the next day, he was already seated at a corner table, dressed in the business casual attire he'd worn throughout his consulting career. He stood to greet me with a brief hug before gesturing for me to sit. Thanks for making time, he said, his tone carrying the slight formality he brought to professional interactions. I know you're busy with all these new developments. Happy to, I replied, unfolding my napkin as the server approached with water. It's good to see you. After ordering, Dad leaned forward slightly, his expression thoughtful. So, this conference Victoria mentioned. Tell me about it. The question was open-ended but focused, exactly how he would approach a business discussion. Not small talk or family chat, but a specific interest in a professional development. I explained the conference opportunity, the potential for new client connections, and the visibility it could bring to Green Canvas. Dad listened with the attentive focus he typically reserved for conversations about market trends or investment strategies. When I mentioned the possibility of becoming the conference's design partner for the following year, he nodded appreciatively. Recurring contracts provide stability, he noted. Smart to pursue those alongside project-based work. It was such a simple observation, but it hit me with unexpected force. He was applying the same business logic to my studio that he would to any enterprise, examining its revenue model, growth strategy, and market positioning without qualifiers or doubts about its legitimacy. He was talking to me founder to founder, not father to daughter who had a cute creative business. That's the plan, I confirmed. Building a mix of project and retainer clients to create more predictable revenue patterns. You've always had good business instincts, he said, surprising me again. Even as a kid. Remember that little greeting card operation you ran in middle school? I laughed, the memory coming back clearly. I charged the neighborhood kids $5 to make custom birthday cards for their friends. Had quite the client list by 8th grade. You tracked everything in that little notebook, Dad recalled. Costs, timelines, repeat customers. Most kids that age would have just drawn pictures and given them away. You built a micro-business. The observation carried weight I hadn't expected, not just the memory itself, but the fact that he had noticed these details, had registered my early entrepreneurial tendencies, even while encouraging me toward more practical career paths later. I guess Green Canvas was a long time coming, I acknowledged. Dad nodded, his expression shifting to something more reflective. I worry sometimes that we pushed you away from this path. Your mother and we wanted security for you, especially seeing how you were always the careful one. the planner. We thought that meant corporate stability would suit you. The admission caught me off guard. Not just its content, but the timing, offered without prompting in the middle of what I'd expected to be a straightforward business lunch. You were looking out for me, I said carefully. But security can look different for different people. For me, it's about building something I control rather than being dependent on corporate decisions I don't. I'm beginning to see that, he acknowledged. Watching how you've grown this business, especially these past few months. It's impressive, Olivia. And I haven't said that enough. The simple validation, offered straightforwardly across a business lunch table, meant more than elaborate praise would have. It was given professional to professional, with respect for the work rather than paternal affection for the person doing it. Thank you, I said simply. That means a lot. The rest of lunch flowed more easily, Dad asking practical questions about my growth plans, offering insights from his own consulting experience about managing client relationships during rapid expansion, even suggesting a commercial real estate contact when I mentioned potentially needing larger studio space if the team continued to grow. When the check came, he reached for it automatically, then paused. "This is a business lunch," he said, a question in his tone. I understood immediately what he was really asking. Whether this conversation fell under family interaction or professional networking. The distinction mattered. Another small recognition of my business as a legitimate enterprise, rather than a hobby I was pursuing with his indulgent support. "Let's split it," I suggested. "Proper business lunch protocol." He smiled, at that, nodding as he calculated his portion. As we walked out together, he stopped briefly at the entrance. "I'm proud of you, Olivia," he said, his tone carrying the weight of someone choosing words with care. "Not just because you're my daughter, because you've built something meaningful through vision and persistence. That's worth respecting, no matter the family connection." As I drove back to my studio afterward, those words settled around me like a gentle weight. Not heavy, but substantive. Dad had finally seen what I'd been trying to show them for years. That green canvas wasn't a creative outlet or a temporary diversion from a real career. It was the real career, built deliberately through professional expertise and business acumen. When I arrived at the studio, I found Marcus reviewing portfolio samples from our latest round of junior designer applications. He glanced up as I entered, immediately catching something in my expression. "Good lunch?" he asked, setting aside the portfolio he'd been examining. Surprisingly, yes. I dropped into the chair across from him. My dad wanted to hear about the conference opportunity. Like, actually hear about it. Business details and everything. Marcus raised his eyebrows slightly. "The same dad who asked when you were going back to agency work at every family gathering for the first year of green canvas? The very same." I shook my head, still processing the interaction. He talked to me like a fellow business owner. No patronizing, no subtle suggestions that I might want a backup plan. Just practical business conversation. Shocking. "Turn of events," Marcus said with a slight smile. "What changed?" I did, I realized, the answer becoming clear as I spoke it. I stopped treating my business like something I needed their permission or approval to pursue. I stopped making it small enough to fit their expectations. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "And when you took it seriously?" "They finally started." "Two as well," I finished. The insight carried me through the next several weeks of intense preparation, finalizing the conference presentation with Victoria, managing expanding client projects, and interviewing potential new team members to support Green Canvas's growth. I found myself working with a clarity and confidence that had previously been diluted by doubt. Not just family-induced doubt, but my own lingering uncertainty about claiming space as a business founder. 3 weeks before the sustainability conference, I hired Elijah Thompson as Green Canvas's junior designer, a recent graduate with exceptional talent and genuine passion for environmental communication. His portfolio showed not just technical skill, but thoughtful consideration of how design choices impacted resource use and messaging effectiveness. During his interview, when I asked why he was interested in sustainable design specifically, his answer resonated deeply. "Design isn't neutral," he'd said, leaning forward with quiet intensity. "Every choice we make either reinforces or challenges existing systems. I want my work to actively support more sustainable approaches rather than passively perpetuating harmful ones." It was exactly the perspective I wanted at Green Canvas. Someone who understood that our specialization wasn't just a market niche, but a values-based practice. I offered him the position that same day. Bringing Elijah on board shifted the studio, dynamic in subtle but significant ways. Having another designer in the space created natural collaboration opportunities. Projects that had previously been solely my responsibility could now be approached as team efforts, with multiple perspectives enriching the outcomes. I found myself moving more into studio leadership, guiding creative direction and client strategy, rather than executing every design element personally. This evolution was timely as new client inquiries continued to increase following the sustainable style feature. What had been a steady trickle became a consistent flow, allowing me to be more selective about which projects Green Canvas took on. I began prioritizing clients whose values authentically aligned with sustainable practices rather than those simply looking to capitalize on eco-friendly messaging without substantive commitments. The Thursday before the sustainability conference, I met with Zoe to finalize her yoga studio's rebranding. As we reviewed the implementation plan in her sun-filled practice space, she studied me with the perceptive gaze that had always made her my favorite cousin. "You seem different," she observed, setting aside the brand guidelines document we'd been discussing. "More. I don't know. Grounded? Is that the right word?" I considered her observation, recognizing its accuracy. "That fits. I feel more centered in my professional identity than I ever have." "It shows," she said simply. "Not just in your work, which has always been excellent, but in how you talk about it. There's no apology in your voice anymore." The insight echoed what Marcus had noted earlier, that subtle shift from someone asking permission to someone claiming space. I hadn't realized how perceptible it was to others until they began remarking on it. "The family dynamics have shifted too," Zoe continued, her tone thoughtful. "Have you noticed? Natalie actually mentioned your magazine feature at Sunday dinner last week, without making it about herself somehow, which might be a first." I laughed at her characterization, which held enough truth to be both funny and slightly uncomfortable. She texted me about potentially collaborating on her company's sustainability initiative, professionally, not as a family favor. Zoe's eyebrows rose. "That's evolution. Glacial, but yes. Aunt Elizabeth mentioned you're presenting at some big conference next week," she added. She seemed genuinely proud, not in that "isn't it cute she's trying" way, but actually impressed. The observation warmed me unexpectedly. Mom's approval had never been the driving force behind Green Canvas, but her genuine recognition still meant something. Not for validation, but for the relationship it represented. The possibility of being both her daughter and a respected professional in my own right, rather than having to compartmentalize those identities. "They're trying," I acknowledged, "in their way." "Because you stopped accepting anything less," Zoe pointed out with characteristic directness. "You drew a line, Olivia. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary." As I drove home that evening, Zoe's words echoed in my mind. Drawing lines, setting boundaries, simple concepts that had been remarkably difficult to implement within family dynamics, built over decades. But the results spoke for themselves, not just in my growing business, but in the slowly evolving relationships with my family. The weekend before the conference, I received an unexpected text from Natalie. Good luck with your presentation next week. Let me know how it goes. Brief, to the point, but entirely lacking the competitive edge or subtle diminishment that had characterized so many of our interactions. Just straightforward acknowledgement from one professional to another. Thanks, I replied. Will do. Simple, uncomplicated, adult. The sustainability conference itself exceeded even my optimistic expectations. Victoria and I presented to a packed room, our case study generating thoughtful questions and engaged discussion. The visual evidence of our rebranding work, showing concrete before and after metrics on consumer engagement and brand perception, provided compelling support for our collaborative approach. Afterward, we were approached by representatives from multiple brands interested in similar partnerships. I distributed more business cards in those 2 hours than I had in the previous 6 months, each conversation reinforcing Green Canvas's positioning as a specialized studio rather than a generic design provider. During the networking reception, that evening, I found myself in conversation with the conference organizers about potentially becoming their design partner for the following year's event. What began as casual exploration quickly evolved into specific discussion of scope, approach, and sustainability requirements for conference materials. We need a partner who truly understands how to minimize environmental impact without compromising communication effectiveness, the program director explained. Based on your work with Westbrook and your presentation today, Green Canvas seems ideally aligned with our values. By the time I left the reception, I had a follow-up meeting scheduled and a preliminary project scope to review. The opportunity represented exactly the kind of growth I'd envisioned for the studio. Partnership with organizations whose values matched our own, creating work that amplified environmental messaging through thoughtful design. I called Marcus on my drive home, too energized to wait until morning to share the developments. We might be designing next year's conference materials, I explained, hands-free phone allowing me to gesture excitedly even alone in my car. Full sustainability implementation, digital, print, environmental graphics, the works. That's massive, he responded, genuine excitement in his voice. Conference work is high visibility and builds incredible portfolio credentials, plus recurring potential. Exactly, I agreed. And the connections from today alone could generate months of project work. I've already got 4 serious consultation requests. Looks like hiring Elijah was perfect timing. And possibly not enough, I admitted. If even half of these leads convert, we'll need more capacity. I'm thinking it might be time to bring on a dedicated project manager. The realization landed with both excitement and a touch of vertigo. The studio was growing faster than even my optimistic projections had anticipated. What had been a carefully managed solo practice just months earlier was rapidly evolving into a genuine team operation with significantly expanded capacity needs. From cute hobby business to hiring multiple employees in under a year, Marcus observed. Wonder what your family would say now. The comment wasn't meant to provoke, but it sparked an unexpected realization. For the first time since starting Green Canvas, I hadn't immediately thought about how my family would perceive this development. Their approval or understanding wasn't the measuring stick against which I was evaluating this growth. I was making business decisions based on market, response, client needs, and strategic vision, not family validation. I haven't even thought about telling them, I admitted. Not because I'm hiding it, but because your business isn't about them, Marcus finished simply. It never was. The truth of that statement settled around me as I continued, driving. Green Canvas had always been about creating design that aligned with my values, that contributed meaningfully to environmental messaging, that fulfilled my creative and entrepreneurial vision. I had allowed family dynamics to distort that purpose, to make their perception central to my professional identity when it should have been peripheral at most. When I arrived home that evening, exhilarated but exhausted from the day's events, I found a small package propped against my apartment door. The return address showed my parents' home, but the handwriting was Dad's distinctive block letters rather than Mom's flowing script. Inside was a small, elegantly crafted wooden plaque. Engraved on its surface, green canvas design, founded. 2022, and beneath it, in slightly smaller text, vision, persistence, impact. A simple note accompanied it. Thought your growing studio deserved a founding marker. Proud of what you're building. Dad. The gesture, understated but meaningful, represented more than just acknowledgement. It was recognition of green canvas. As an entity with history and legitimacy, as a business worth marking and remembering. The kind of gift Dad would give a colleague celebrating a company milestone, not a child pursuing a hobby. I placed it on my desk, where it would be visible during work hours, not as validation, but as acknowledgement of the journey. Of how far the business had come, yes, but more importantly, how far I had come in owning my professional identity without qualification or apology. The following morning, I arrived at the studio earlier than usual, energized despite minimal sleep. I had calls scheduled with 2 potential clients from the conference, a team meeting to brief Elijah on upcoming projects, and a list of project management software options to review in preparation for potentially expanding the team further. As I unlocked the studio door, my phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "How did your presentation go yesterday? Dad and I were thinking of you." Simple, straightforward, the kind of supportive message she might send Natalie before an important pitch or client meeting. No diminishment, no subtle suggestion that this was cute or temporary. Just genuine interest in a professional milestone. "It went really well," I replied, setting my bag down at my desk. Great response to our case study and several promising new client connections. The conference organizers are considering green canvas for next year's event materials. Her response came quickly. "That's wonderful, honey. A testament to the quality of your work. Keep us posted?" Another shift, slight but significant. Not assuming I would share every detail with no boundaries between personal and professional, but respectfully asking to be kept informed about developments that mattered. "Will do," I texted back, then set my phone aside to prepare for the day ahead. By mid-morning, I had confirmed consultation appointments with 3 new potential clients, all referred through connections made at the conference. By lunchtime, Victoria had emailed with news that another brand in her network was seeking design support for their packaging redesign. By mid-afternoon, the conference organizers had sent a formal request for proposal for the following year's materials. As I updated our project pipeline to reflect these developments, the studio's growth trajectory came into sharp focus. What had begun as a solo practice built on passion and specialized expertise was evolving into something more substantial. A recognized entity in the sustainable design space, a team-based operation with expanding capacity, a business with genuine momentum. The contrast with where green canvas had stood just months earlier, when my family laughed at my contract with Victoria, couldn't have been starker. Not because their perception had changed, though it had. Not because external validation had finally arrived, though it had. But because I had finally, fully claimed ownership of my professional identity without seeking permission or apologizing for its form. I had stopped making myself small to fit their expectations, had stopped treating my business as conditional or temporary or secondary to family obligations. And in that space of unapologetic ownership, green canvas had found room to become exactly what I had envisioned from the beginning. A studio creating meaningful work at the intersection of design excellence and environmental values. As I prepared to leave the studio that evening, I paused to straighten the portfolios and sample materials that would greet potential clients the following day. My gaze caught on a framed print near the entrance, our first award-winning design, created during those early months when I was still balancing agency freelance work with building green canvas. I remembered the long nights, the financial uncertainty, the persistent vision that had carried me forward even when success seemed distant. That persistence had never been about proving my family wrong. It had been about proving myself right, about creating work that reflected my values, about building a business that expressed my vision, about establishing a professional identity that didn't require qualification or apology. In the end, what had changed wasn't just my family's perception or Green Canvas's market position. What had changed, fundamentally and irrevocably, was my relationship with my own professional worth. I had stopped waiting for permission to take my business seriously. I had stopped making it small enough to avoid challenging family dynamics. I had simply claimed the space my vision required and built within it without qualification. And perhaps that had been the key all along. Not convincing others of Green Canvas's legitimacy, but embodying that legitimacy so completely that questioning it became impossible. Not arguing for my place at the table, but building my own table and inviting others to join when they were ready to see me clearly. 3 months after the sustainability conference, Green Canvas Design occupied a very different position than it had at the beginning of the year. The studio had moved from my modest original space to a larger office in a renovated industrial building in Portland's creative district. Wide windows flooded the main workspace with natural light, and the living wall I'd installed, a collaboration with a local sustainable plant designer, created a literal embodiment of our name and values. Most significantly, the team had expanded. Elijah had proven himself an exceptional junior designer, bringing fresh perspective and technical skill to our projects. Sophia Diaz had joined us as project manager, her previous experience in sustainable product development providing valuable insights into client needs and processes. And most recently, I'd hired Aidan Parker, a designer specializing in sustainable packaging, who had approached me after seeing our work for Westbrook. The growth hadn't been without challenges. Managing cash flow during expansion required careful planning. Finding the right collaborative dynamics within a newly formed team meant navigating different working styles and communication preferences. And maintaining creative consistency while delegating design work demanded clear direction and regular feedback. But with each challenge came evidence that Green Canvas was evolving into exactly what I'd envisioned: a studio creating meaningful work that aligned environmental values with design excellence. Our client roster now included 6 sustainable brands, 3 nonprofit environmental organizations, and the upcoming conference materials project. The work was varied, challenging, and deeply satisfying, the kind of professional engagement I'd hoped for when leaving agency life 3 years earlier. On a crisp October morning, I arrived at the studio to find Sophia already at her desk, reviewing the week's project schedule with characteristic efficiency. "Morning," she greeted, glancing up from her monitor. "The call with Nature Forward is confirmed for 11. Elijah finished the initial concepts for their campaign yesterday. They're impressive." "Perfect," I replied, setting down my bag. "Any word from the packaging printer about Westbrook's new materials?" "Samples should arrive this afternoon. I've blocked an hour at 3 for us to review them together before sending to Victoria." Sophia's calm competence had transformed our project management from my previous ad hoc approach to a structured system that allowed creative work to flow without administrative friction. Her presence made expansion possible in ways I hadn't fully anticipated when hiring her. As I settled at my desk, I noticed an email from Natalie. Subject line: Sustainability Initiative Next Steps. Over the past 2 months, Green Canvas had been consulting on her company's environmental messaging strategy. What had begun as a tentative professional connection between sisters had evolved into a genuine client relationship, with clear boundaries and expectations on both sides. Opening the email, I found a thoughtful response to our latest presentation, along with specific questions about implementation timelines. Professional, focused, appreciative of our expertise without family complications. A collaboration I would have considered impossible 6 months earlier. I drafted a response addressing her questions, copying Sophia to schedule a follow-up meeting. As I worked, I reflected on how significantly our dynamic had shifted since Dad's birthday party. The mockery that had once stung so sharply now seemed like a relic from a different life, not because it had lost its capacity to hurt, but because both Natalie and I had moved beyond it into a more mature relationship, one that accommodated both family connection and professional respect. Mid-morning, Mom called as I was reviewing Elijah's concepts for the Nature Forward campaign. Seeing her name on my screen, I considered letting it go to voicemail. Not out of avoidance, but because I was in work mode, focused on client deliverables. But our relationship had evolved enough that I trusted a brief conversation wouldn't derail my morning. "Hi, Mom," I answered, shifting to speaker mode so I could continue reviewing the designs. "Olivia, good morning. Am I catching you at a bad time?" The question itself represented progress, acknowledgement that my business might have legitimate demands on my attention, rather than automatic expectation of availability. "I've got about 5 minutes before I need to prepare for a client call," I replied honestly. "What's up?" "Perfect. This won't take long. Your father and I are putting together a small dinner next weekend. Just family, nothing elaborate. Saturday at 7. We'd love for you to join us if your schedule permits." Again, the phrasing showed evolution. "If your schedule permits, rather. Then we expect you to be there." Small shifts in language that reflected larger shifts in perspective. I checked my calendar quickly. "Saturday should work. I'll let you know if anything changes." "Wonderful," Mom replied. "Oh, and feel free to bring anyone from your team if you'd like. We'd love to meet the people you're working with now." The invitation caught me off guard, not just its content, but what it represented. My family had never shown interest in meeting my professional colleagues before, had never acknowledged my work life as something that might include meaningful relationships worth exploring. It was the kind of invitation they'd extend to Natalie without thought. Of course, she might want to bring colleagues to family gatherings, but had never offered to me. "That's thoughtful," I said, genuinely touched. "Let me check with Sophia and see if she's available. She's our project manager. You'd like her." After we hung up, I sat with the conversation for a moment. The changes in our family dynamic weren't dramatic or announced. They were revealed in these small moments, in the way Mom now asked rather than assumed, in the interest she showed in my professional world, in the space she created for me to exist as both daughter and business owner without contradiction. The Nature Forward call went exceptionally well, with the client responding enthusiastically to Elijah's concepts. His approach had captured exactly what they'd described in the brief: visual language that conveyed environmental urgency without resorting to apocalyptic imagery, messaging that inspired action rather than despair. As the newest member of our team, his contribution affirmed the studio's growing capabilities beyond my individual design sensibility. After the call, I walked to his desk to share the positive feedback. "They loved the direction, especially the typography system you developed." The program director specifically mentioned how it felt both authoritative and accessible. Elijah's expression brightened. "That's exactly what I was aiming for. Nature Forward's work is so technically complex, but they needed to connect with non-scientific audiences without losing credibility." "You nailed it," I confirmed. "I'd like you to take lead on developing the complete system. Sophia will work with you on timeline and deliverables." The opportunity to delegate significant creative responsibility, not just execution tasks but conceptual development, represented another evolution in Green Canvas's growth. Building a studio culture meant nurturing talent while maintaining creative vision, a balance I was still learning to strike. That afternoon, when the Westbrook packaging samples arrived, the entire team gathered around the conference table to review them. The physical manifestation of months of design work, sustainable materials, vegetable-based inks, structural efficiency that minimized shipping impact while maximizing shelf presence, brought a collective satisfaction that transcended individual contribution. "The texture is perfect," Aiden noted, running his finger along the recycled packaging surface. You get the tactile signal that it's eco-friendly without compromising the premium feel. And the color reproduction held up beautifully on this stock, Elijah added. The printers really delivered. As we discussed minor refinements for the final production run, I felt a wave of professional fulfillment unlike anything I'd experienced in my agency days. This wasn't just satisfying client requirements or meeting design standards. It was creating work that genuinely aligned with values that mattered, with a team that shared those values. Later that evening, as I prepared to leave the studio, my phone lit up with a text from Dad. Free for a quick call? Have some business advice to ask. The request itself marked yet another shift in our relationship. Dad seeking my input on a business matter rather than positioning himself as the family's sole authority on professional decisions. I called him from my car. Olivia, he answered, promptly. Thanks for getting back to me so quickly. No problem. What's up? I'm working with a new client who's emphasizing sustainability in their operations, he explained. Manufacturing company, very traditional, but the new leadership wants to authentically integrate environmental practices without it feeling like greenwashing. Thought you might have insights from your client work. The question reflected genuine, professional respect. Recognition that my experience in the sustainability space might offer valuable perspective for his consulting work. Not Dad humoring his daughter's creative endeavors, but one business professional consulting another in their area of expertise. That's actually a challenge many of our clients face, I confirmed. The key is integration rather than addition, building sustainable practices into core operations rather than treating them as separate initiatives. We talked for nearly 20 minutes, discussing authentic communication strategies for companies transitioning toward more sustainable models. Dad asked thoughtful questions, took notes, and treated my expertise with the same seriousness he would give any business colleague. As we wrapped up, he said, "This is extremely helpful, Olivia. Would you be open to a more formal consultation? The client would compensate you for your time, of course. Your perspective would be valuable to their planning process." The request represented the final dissolution of the old boundary between real business and creative hobby that had characterized his perception of my work for years. He wasn't asking for free family advice. He was proposing a professional collaboration with appropriate compensation. "I'd be interested," I replied. "Have them reach out through the studio website to schedule a consultation, and we can determine if it's a good fit." "Perfect. I'll let them know." A brief pause. "This is a nice reversal, isn't it? Me asking you for business guidance." The observation carried no defensiveness, just warm acknowledgement of our evolving relationship. "It is," I agreed. "A good one." By the time Saturday evening arrived, Green Canvas had confirmed 2 new client projects, finalized the conference, materials contract, and scheduled interviews for a potential second junior designer position. The growth was exhilarating, but demanded careful management to maintain both creative quality and team sustainability. I'd invited Sophia to join me for my parents' dinner, partly because her calm presence would be welcome in family gatherings that could still carry undercurrents of old dynamics, and partly because I genuinely wanted my family to meet the people who were helping build Green Canvas into something beyond my original vision. "Are you sure this isn't too weird?" Sophia asked as we drove to Lake Oswego. "Meeting your family when we've only worked together for 2 months?" "Not weird at all," I assured her. "They specifically asked to meet my team. Besides, you've managed a project with my sister already. You've technically been dealing with my family since week 1. She laughed at that. True, though Natalie in client mode is surprisingly straightforward compared to some of our other clients. "She's always been direct," I acknowledged. "It works better in professional contexts than family ones sometimes." When we arrived at my parents' home, I was surprised to see Natalie's car already in the driveway. My sister was notoriously late to family gatherings, often arriving after appetizers were finished with dramatic stories about work emergencies that had detained her. Her early arrival suggested this evening held some significance I wasn't yet aware of. Mom opened the door before we could knock, greeting us with warm enthusiasm. "Olivia, and you must be Sophia. Welcome, come in. Everyone's on the patio. Perfect." Evening for outdoor dining. The everyone turned out to include not just Natalie, but also her colleague James from the Sustainability Initiative, along with Dad and cousin Zoe. An interesting assembly that blurred the lines between family gathering and professional networking. As introductions were made, I observed the easy way Sophia integrated into the group, offering thoughtful comments on Zoe's recent studio expansion, asking intelligent questions about Dad's consulting projects, finding common ground with James over mutual connections in the sustainability sector. Her presence highlighted how much my professional and personal worlds had remained separate until recently, not by necessity, but by tacit understanding that my work wasn't real enough to bridge the gap. During dinner, conversation flowed naturally, between family updates and business discussions. Natalie shared news about her department's restructuring, while Zoe described her studio's new meditation program. No one topic dominated, and no one person monopolized attention. A noticeable shift from past gatherings where family dynamics often followed predictable grooves. As Mom served dessert, Dad cleared his throat slightly, his signal for wanting the group's attention. While everyone's together, I wanted to share some news. He glanced at Mom, who nodded encouragingly. "I've decided to scale back my consulting practice starting next year. Not retiring completely, but transitioning to a more advisory role with fewer clients." The announcement wasn't entirely surprising. Dad had mentioned considering a reduction in his workload over the past year, but the timing and forum suggested there was more to come. "As part of that transition," he continued, "I've been thinking about legacy planning, not just financial aspects, but how to preserve and transfer the knowledge and connections I've built over 40 years in business." He looked around the table, his gaze settling on me with unexpected intensity. "Olivia, our conversation last week about sustainability integration for my manufacturing client got me thinking. There's significant overlap between my client base and the direction Green Canvas is moving. Companies looking to evolve their practices while maintaining their core business strength." I felt myself leaning forward slightly, sensing where this might be heading but not wanting to assume. "I'd like to propose a collaborative transition," Dad continued. "Not a merger, your business has its own identity and direction, but a strategic partnership where I could introduce appropriate clients to Green Canvas for their sustainability communication needs while I step back from active consulting." The proposal landed with gentle weight, significant without being overwhelming. Not Dad trying to take over my business or subsume it under his authority, but a genuine recognition of mutually beneficial alignment between his established consultancy and my growing studio. "I think that could be valuable," I responded, careful to maintain professional tone despite the family setting. "We should discuss specifics, client profiles, transition process, expectations on both sides. But conceptually, it makes sense." Dad nodded, seemingly pleased by my response. Exactly what I was thinking. No rush to formalize anything, but worth exploring. The conversation evolved into a broader discussion of business transitions and partnerships, with everyone at the table contributing perspectives from their respective fields. James offered insights from his corporate background, while Sophia asked thoughtful questions about implementation logistics. Zoe shared experiences from her yoga community's mentorship program, while Natalie analyzed potential market perceptions. What struck me most wasn't just the content of the discussion, but its nature. A family gathering that had organically transformed into a professional brainstorming session, where every voice was valued for its genuine contribution, rather than family position. My expertise wasn't questioned or diminished, just as Natalie's corporate perspective wasn't automatically prioritized. Each viewpoint was considered on its merits rather than its source. As the evening wound down, Sophia and I prepared to leave. Mom pulled me aside briefly as Dad engaged Sophia in conversation about her previous work experience. "It's wonderful to see your business thriving, Olivia," she said quietly. "Your father and we didn't always understand what you were building. I think we were looking at it through outdated lenses." The acknowledgement, offered without prompting, carried the weight of genuine reflection rather than obligatory support. "It took me time to fully believe in it myself," I admitted, "to stop treating it as temporary or conditional." Mom nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes we see our children as we first knew them rather than as they're becoming. I'm sorry if that limited how we supported you." "We're finding better patterns now," I said, the simple truth of it settling between us comfortably. On the drive back to Portland, Sophia was uncharacteristically quiet for several minutes before speaking. "Your family is not what I expected." "How so?" "Based on the bits you've shared about past dynamics. I expected more tension, more of that thing where families can't update their image of each other, but they seem to genuinely respect what you've built." Her observation made me consider how significantly perceptions had shifted since the beginning of the year, both my family's view of me and my own expectations of our interactions. "It's evolved," I acknowledged. "We're writing a different story, now." The following week brought practical follow-up to Dad's proposal. He sent a thoughtful email outlining potential collaboration structures, complete with client profiles that might benefit from Green Canvas's approach. Not a casual family suggestion, but a professional overture, presented with appropriate formality. Despite our relationship, I scheduled a proper meeting to discuss it further, not at family dinner or over casual coffee, but in Green Canvas's conference room with Sophia present to help evaluate the business implications. Dad arrived precisely on time, bringing market analysis and transition timelines for our consideration. "I've identified 5 clients initially who might be appropriate for this kind of strategic handoff," he explained, sharing the document he'd prepared. "All have expressed interest in strengthening their sustainability positioning, and all have communication needs that align with Green Canvas's expertise." We spent 2 hours discussing specifics, client expectations, value propositions, potential challenges in transitioning long-time business relationships. The conversation remained professionally focused throughout, with Dad treating me and Sophia as business peers rather than as daughter and employee. "I appreciate the thoroughness of your approach," I said as we wrapped up. "Let me review this with the full team and get back to you next week with thoughts on implementation." Dad nodded, gathering his materials. "Take the time you need. This should only move forward if it genuinely benefits both sides." As he prepared to leave, he paused briefly. "This is a strange question, but does this feel odd to you? Working together professionally after?" He trailed off, not needing to explicitly reference the years of dismissing my business as a temporary diversion. "Less odd than I might have expected," I replied honestly. "We're finding a new dynamic." "We are," he agreed, "and I like it better than the old one." After he left, Sophia reviewed her notes from the meeting. "This could be a significant growth channel if structured properly. His client relationships are well established, and the sustainability angle provides a natural transition point." "Agreed," I said. "The key will be maintaining our studio's creative independence while leveraging his business development experience." What remained unspoken but understood was how dramatically things had changed. From a family that laughed at my client contract to a father proposing business collaboration as equals. The evolution hadn't required dramatic confrontations or ultimatums, just consistent boundaries and professional self-respect on my part, matched eventually by growing recognition from them. That evening, as I updated our business development pipeline to reflect potential projects from Dad's client base, I received a text from Natalie. James can't stop talking about green canvas and your team. Says your sustainability approach is exactly what the market needs right now. Little sister making waves. The message carried none of the competitive edge that would have colored similar communications in the past, just straightforward professional acknowledgement with a touch of familial warmth. I smiled as I typed my response. Glad the conversation was valuable. Your initiative is creating interesting ripples too. Heard it mentioned at 2 client meetings this week. This easy exchange of professional recognition between sisters would have been unimaginable at Dad's birthday party. Not because Natalie had fundamentally changed. She remained ambitious, direct, and career-focused, but because the framework of our relationship had shifted. We had found space to exist as both sisters and professionals without those identities contradicting each other. The following Monday morning, I gathered the full green canvas team to discuss Dad's proposal. Elijah and Aiden brought valuable perspective on creative implications, while Sophia assessed operational feasibility. Together, we evaluated potential benefits and challenges with the same thoroughness we would apply to any significant business opportunity. I think it could work well if we establish clear parameters from the beginning, Sophia concluded, summarizing our discussion. Your father's consulting reputation would open doors that might otherwise take years to access, while our specialized expertise offers genuine value to his clients facing sustainability challenges. And it positions us as business strategy partners, not just design executors, Aiden added. That aligns with where we've been trying to move the studio. The team's thoughtful analysis reflected how much Green Canvas had evolved from a solo practice to a collaborative studio with shared vision and complementary expertise. My decision-making now incorporated multiple perspectives rather than resting solely on my individual judgment, a necessary evolution for sustainable growth. I'll draft a formal response, I decided. We'll propose a phased approach, starting with 2 clients as a pilot before expanding further. As I worked on the proposal that afternoon, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought Green Canvas to this point. From a nascent studio struggling for recognition to a growing team considering strategic partnership with an established consultancy. From family mockery of my failing business to professional collaboration with the same people who had once dismissed it. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had built gradually through consistent actions, treating my business with seriousness even when others didn't, establishing professional boundaries even when they felt uncomfortable, claiming space for my expertise without apology or qualification. And eventually, those around me had begun to see Green Canvas as I had always envisioned it, not as a hobby or diversion, but as a legitimate business creating meaningful impact. What had changed most fundamentally wasn't external circumstances, but internal certainty, my unwavering belief in what I was building, regardless of whether others immediately recognized its value. That certainty had created space for Green Canvas to grow into its potential, rather than being limited by others' perceptions. And somewhere along that journey, my family had begun to adjust their vision, not because I had demanded their recognition, but because the evidence had become too substantial to ignore. The magazine feature, the expanding client list, the growing team, the industry connections, all tangible manifestations of what had once been dismissed as unlikely to succeed. As I finalized the partnership proposal for Dad's review, I realized that the most significant shift wasn't in my family's perception of Green Canvas, but in how little that perception now determined my own sense of professional worth. Their recognition was welcome but no longer necessary. Their respect was appreciated but no longer sought as validation. I had built something meaningful whether they saw it or not, and eventually they had chosen to see it clearly, not because I needed them to, but because the reality had become impossible to ignore. 1 year after walking out of Dad's birthday party, I found myself standing at a podium in the Portland Convention Center, addressing the annual Sustainable Business Leadership Conference. Green Canvas Design had been invited as a featured presenter, not just as a design studio, but as a case study in purpose-driven business growth. Authentic values alignment isn't just good ethics, I told the gathered audience of industry leaders and entrepreneurs. It's good business strategy. When your work genuinely reflects what matters to you, clients who share those values recognize the difference immediately. From my position on stage, I could see our team seated together in the third row, Sophia, Elijah, and Aiden, along with our two newest designers. In the row behind them sat my family, Mom and Dad, Natalie, and cousin Zoe. Their presence wasn't just supportive. It was symbolic of how completely the narrative had shifted. The studio that had once been mockingly dismissed as a failing business now employed 7 people, served clients across North America, and had just been featured in Business Northwest's Companies to Watch issue. The contract that had been laughed at had led to relationships that transformed Green Canvas from a solo operation to a recognized leader in sustainable design. After my presentation concluded to warm applause, a reception followed where something remarkable happened. My professional and personal worlds merged seamlessly. Mom engaged Elijah in genuine conversation about his design approach. Dad and Sophia discussed operational scaling challenges with mutual respect. Natalie introduced our team to colleagues from her company's sustainability division as valued collaborators rather than her sister's employees. No one was performing or pretending. There was no underlying tension requiring management. We had simply arrived at a new reality where my professional identity and family role existed in harmony, rather than contradiction. As we prepared to leave, Victoria Westbrook, our first major client, now a close friend, pulled me aside with a warm smile. "I just overheard your sister introducing you to the Ecotech CEO," she said. "She called you one of the most innovative thinkers in sustainable brand communication. That's quite an evolution from where things stood when we first met." The observation caught me by surprise, not because it wasn't accurate, but because I'd stopped tracking the distance between past and present perceptions. Natalie's professional respect had ceased being remarkable and simply become our new normal. "It's been a journey," I acknowledged with a slight smile. "For all of you, it seems," Victoria noted, glancing toward where my parents were exchanging contact information with a potential client they'd met during the reception. "They see you clearly now." Her observation settled around me with gentle, "Wait." They did see me clearly now, not as the reliable but unremarkable younger daughter, not as the creative one with an impractical hobby, but as a business founder whose vision and persistence had built something of genuine value. Yet, what struck me most profoundly was how little I needed that recognition anymore. Their respect was welcome, but no longer essential to my sense of professional worth. I had built Green Canvas Design regardless of whether they understood or valued it. Their eventual recognition was the result of that confidence, not its source. 2 weeks after the conference, we gathered at my parents' home to celebrate Dad's retirement transition. He had officially scaled back to 3 key clients, with several others successfully introduced to Green Canvas for their sustainability communication needs. The partnership we'd developed had benefited both his legacy planning and our studio's growth, a professional collaboration that had developed naturally from mutual respect rather than familial obligation. As evening settled around the lakeside patio, conversation flowed easily between business updates and family matters. No artificial separation between these aspects of our lives, no unspoken hierarchy of importance. When Natalie discussed her department's recent restructuring, we engaged with her challenges as fellow professionals. When I shared news about Green Canvas's expanded client base, they asked thoughtful questions reflecting genuine understanding of our business model. At one point, Dad raised his glass in an impromptu toast. "To new chapters," he said simply, "and to seeing clearly what matters." The words carried meaning beyond their surface, acknowledgement of how fundamentally perceptions had shifted over the past year. Not just their view of my business, but my understanding of what validation truly mattered. Later that evening, as I helped Mom clear dessert plates, she paused briefly by the kitchen window. "You know what I realized recently?" she said, her expression reflective. "We always thought Natalie was the one who took after your father with her business sense. But watching you build Green Canvas from concept to thriving studio, you may have inherited more of his entrepreneurial spirit than any of us recognized." The observation wasn't offered as apology or even compliment, just quiet recognition of a truth that had been overlooked for years. Different expressions of the same traits, I suggested. Natalie thrives in corporate structures. I needed to build something of my own. Mom nodded thoughtfully. And we needed time to understand that your path wasn't less valid, just different. On the drive home that night, I reflected on how completely the family narrative had transformed. The studio that had been dismissed as temporary was now discussed with the same seriousness as Natalie's corporate career. My business decisions were given the same weight as her strategic moves. The playing field had leveled not through confrontation, but through consistent evidence that could no longer be ignored. Yet the most profound shift wasn't in their perception, but in my relationship to that perception. I no longer measured Green Canvas's legitimacy by their recognition or adjusted my ambitions to fit their expectations. The validation that mattered came from clients who trusted our approach, team members who believed in our vision, and the tangible impact of work that aligned with my deepest values. The following week, as our team gathered for our quarterly planning session, I shared a decision I'd been considering for months. "I think it's time to formalize our environmental impact commitment," I explained, outlining a framework for measuring and reducing our studio's ecological footprint, not just in client work, but in our own operations. The proposal sparked enthusiastic discussion, with everyone contributing ideas for implementation. As we mapped out next steps, I was struck by how naturally leadership had distributed across the team. Sophia addressing operational implications, Elijah considering creative applications, newer members bringing fresh perspective to long-held values. This was Green Canvas as I had always envisioned it, not just my individual practice expanded, but a collaborative entity with shared purpose and distributed expertise. A business that expressed values through action, rather than merely claiming them through messaging. That evening, as I updated our studio website to reflect our new environmental commitment, I came across the original Green Canvas mission statement I'd written 3 years earlier, back when the studio existed more as concept than reality. Its core premise remained unchanged: creating design that honored both communication needs and environmental values without compromising either. What had changed wasn't the vision, but its manifestation, from aspiration to implementation, from individual practice to team culture, from questioned validity to demonstrated impact. The mockery at Dad's birthday party now felt like a scene from someone else's story, not because it hadn't happened or hadn't hurt, but because it no longer defined either my business narrative or my family relationships. We had all moved beyond that moment into a different understanding. Not perfect, still evolving, but fundamentally transformed. Green Canvas design continued to grow, not because I had convinced skeptics of its value, but because I had remained convinced myself, enough to keep building regardless of external validation, enough to maintain standards even when easier paths presented themselves, enough to claim professional respect rather than waiting for it to be offered. And eventually, that unwavering conviction had created its own evidence, tangible, irrefutable proof that what had once been dismissed as unlikely to succeed had become impossible to dismiss at all. The failing business they had laughed at had never been failing, it had simply been becoming. And in choosing to see it clearly, they had become something new themselves. A family that celebrated distinct paths rather than prescribed ones, that recognized multiple forms of success rather than narrow definitions of achievement. But the most significant transformation remained internal. My quiet certainty that green canvas design's worth had never depended on their recognition. Their eventual respect was welcome, but it wasn't what had built a thriving studio from initial concept to industry recognition. That had been my work all along. The vision clear enough to guide me when others couldn't yet see it, the persistence strong enough to sustain me when external validation was absent, the belief solid enough to stand firm when laughter tried to shake it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.